The Royal Palace of Portici is a historic residence built by King Charles of Bourbon and his wife Maria Amalia of Saxony as a summer villa for the Bourbon dynasty in Naples. Construction lasted from 1738 to 1742, and the architectural project was commissioned by Charles of Bourbon to Antonio Cannavaro, who was assisted by numerous engineers, decorators, and architects. For the most representative rooms, the court scenographer, or set designer, Vincenzo Re, who came to Naples in the entourage of Charles of Bourbon, was asked to use his skills as a scenographer in the decoration of the atrium and the royal staircase, in order to give more splendor to these rooms, whose small size seemed inadequate for the royal purpose of the palace. The walls of the atrium and the staircase were decorated with tempera painting, using the perspective representation of Baroque architecture. The site of Portici became the center of architectural activities of the period. The finds that were discovered from time to time in the buried cities of Herculaneum and Pompeii were housed in the rooms of the palace, forming one of the most famous collections in the world, which gave rise to the Museum of Herculaneum, opened in 1758. This became one of the most important destinations of the Grand Tour. In the early years of the 19th century, the archaeological collections were then brought to Naples and formed the origin of the current National Archaeological Museum. On December 10, 2021, the exhibition Inspirational, Influence of Place, curated by Cynthia Pena, was inaugurated in the beautiful halls of the University of Architecture. The group exhibition, organized by Curatorial Association Art 1307, featured the works of 7 artists, including Kelly Berg, Laddie John Dill, Ned Evans, Justin Garcia, Shane Gaffog, Miguel Osuna, and Todd Williamson. It was also an opportunity to celebrate the anniversary of the opening of the first United States Embassy in Italy, located in Naples.
This contemporary art exhibit is really powerful in that it links the past and the present in so many ways that we see here in Naples and in Campania all around us. But in this exhibit, what we see is the past and the present of Americans' reactions to this region, the beauty, the history of Naples. And that, for us at the Consulate General of the United States in Naples, is very important at this time because we're also celebrating our long history in Naples, and we're very happy to be able to sponsor this continuation of the exchange of ideas.
The exhibition Inspirational, Influence of Place has had a long gestation period that begun during the lockdowns of 2020, when I, like everyone else, was locked in my house and had lots of books to keep me company. Among the books, there was one that I had not yet read, Americana by Pier Luigi Razzano, a sort of collection of works by American writers from the 18th to the 20th centuries during the Grand Tour. Reading this gave me the idea of having some American visual artists work based on the inspiration this book could give them. Since I always had in mind the reference to Campania and Naples, it was possible to create a mixture of ancient literature and contemporary art. The 2021 project grew out of a request from the U.S. Consulate in Naples for a possible exhibition to celebrate the 225th anniversary of the establishment of the first U.S. diplomatic mission in Italy, which was established in Naples in 1796. At that time, Naples was one of the most important kingdoms in Europe, and the Borbones established the first diplomatic mission there.
Nel 1796 Napoli era uno dei regni più importanti d'Europa a quell'epoca.
After this point, I had to search for an exhibition venue, and I turned to the University of Naples in Porcini. The Musa is a center that houses 7 different museums, and is very special because they are archaeological and mineralogical museums, in addition to the Botanical Gardens and Wine Museum, and the most famous museum, Herculaneum, where we can see backlit photographs, which are photographs of paintings or mosaics found in both Pompeii and Herculaneum, originally taken here in the Royal Palace of Porcini, in the restoration laboratory established by Charles of Bourbon. In the 19th century, they were then transferred to the Archaeological Museum of Naples, where they are today. This place, the Palace of Bourbon, was, in my opinion, ideal for this project, to unite American literature with American visual arts. The first and foremost intention was to show the audience that there is a common thread in history and art, and how the past, the present, and the future are irrevocably merged by human beings, so that the past, the future, or the present are never entirely separate. The first intention then was to show how the work of contemporary art can easily dialogue with works of ancient art and with the particular architecture of a royal palace. The second intention was to give a visual idea of our land, Campania and Naples, through the eyes of people who have no emotional attachment to it. The last point was also a social intention, which was to give visitors a social message that can lead them to protect our land. A damaged land always implies damaged thoughts, and therefore protecting the land has become our top priority today. This is the room number 4. This room was the room of the governess of Charles of Bourbone's children. During the restoration, a peculiarity of this room was discovered, or rather of these 2 rooms, because there is another one over there. That is to say, a ceiling made of wood beams. This one was covered with a painted wallpaper of the year 700, with heraldic motifs and containing a typical Bourbon lily. In this room, not fully illuminated, were the exhibited works of Laddie John Dill, one of the great California artists of the so-called light and space movement, historicized in 2012 by the great exhibition of all the cultural institutions of California gathered around the Getty Museum. And here we are in the 5th room, a very small room dedicated to this model that recreates what hypothetically should be the Basilica of Herculaneum, which has not yet been excavated. All of us hope that future generations will have the opportunity to see. Anyway, from various archaeological elements, they were able to reconstruct this model with this shape. In this room, I saw that there was this sculpture entirely made of white chalk, and then this ceiling that I talked about before with these heraldic coats of arms, and however our very peculiar decoration made of 18th century paper. At this point, I decided to insert this neon of Laddie John Dill, which, in this case, is not a neon, but a tubular glass injected with argon and mercury, so that the coloring is much brighter, as you can see from this difference in the previous one. This color variety is reflected on the white of the basilica model as well as on the ceiling, and it completely changes the color perception because the model is immersed in an atmosphere between yellow and pink, and there are definitely some corners of the ceiling that turn into pink coloration, losing almost entirely the original yellow coloration. This is to illustrate to the audience how much a glass tube of this type can change the perception of the color of the entire room, and how immersive the environment can be in which we now find ourselves. We continue our visit into the seventh room. This room is called Gabinetto di Toeletta and has as its main decorative element a ceiling with trompe-l'oeil decoration, that is to say, an illusionistic effect, achieved by a painting on canvas, representing a simulation of a curtain decorated with false beaded fabric. In this environment are installed the artworks by Kelly Berg. She is a California artist, and the main interest of her art and works is the earth and everything it can represent. On the one hand, the underground, that is, the quarries, fractures, and subsoil, that is, all the elements that are not normally visible to the human eye. On the other hand, the earth is also understood in a cosmic sense, as a link between what cannot be seen. We find this fascination with the earth in her works, which are both abstract and figurative. In this case, it can be seen not only in the first work, through the great idea of the sublime, sublime in the romantic sense of the word, with the vision of Mount Vesuvius. The volcanoes are another characteristic of her artistic production, but especially in the second work, which can be considered a testimony of the grand tour that Kelly Berg personally undertook in Campania. In fact, on one side is represented Vesuvius, where the viewer can see a volcanic eruption, and here returns the interest for the earth and its terrible but fascinating and wonderful aspect. On the other hand, in order to enter again and again in this magical and fascinating but awe-inspiring atmosphere, are represented thunders, lightning storms that appear in the wonderful landscape of Campania and Capri. And under this representation is the cave of Seiano, a mysterious and fascinating passage, which in ancient times was a main passage to reach the archaeological area of Posillipo, then a journey into beauty to reach further beauty. Shanga Fogg lives and works in Los Angeles, and in the last 2 years opened another studio on a ranch in Strathmore in Central California, midway equidistance between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Shanga Fogg was the personal assistant to the great California artist Edward Ruscha for 8 years, and later he began a most brilliant career that has evolved over time. Today, he is considered one of the most important California artists. For the exhibition in Naples, he wanted to represent 2 works, one of which is a very large format dedicated to the Gulf of Naples. In fact, the title of the 2 works is Bay of Naples 1 and 2. The second work is, of course, a little smaller. The representation of the Bay of Naples is also the result of his memory of Naples during his last visit in 2012, when he presented a series of works, almost a retrospective, organized by Art 1307 Cultural Institution. This time he returned dedicated to the Bay of Naples 2 works, technically and visually very complex, but very rich. As he managed to produce the vibrant humanity of this city with thousands of lights and thousands of boats in its bay, described by his reference author in this project, Fenimore Cooper, who had spoken of this teeming Bay of Naples in his grand tour. He interpreted Fenimore Cooper's writing about the teeming life and lights of the Bay of Naples in his own way, alternating 14 levels of a precise pattern that he identified in this kind of rhomboid sign that he was alternating. As I said, 14 levels of glazing and color so that this work should be viewed up close and then from a distance. From this idea of thousands of lights opening and exploding in the Bay of Naples, the viewer is invited to go inside and imagine what can happen in this vibrant crowd, which is extremely energetic and full of vitality.
I'm an American artist from Los Angeles, California, and I came to Naples for the first time exactly 9 years ago this week. And I had a really beautiful experience. The colors of the buildings, the reflection of light from the water, but also the history of the city are what stayed with me. And I was really struck by how many different cultures have been in Naples through the millennia and the impact that each has had. I felt and saw remnants of these different cultures everywhere. And I'm a really big fan of history, and especially art history. And I feel that art is, quite frankly, it's an ongoing conversation between generations. And if I don't understand what was being spoken before me, then it's hard for me to know what to say now. Needless to say, I enjoy going to museums, and the museums in Naples are really phenomenal. Cut to, Cynthia called me a couple of years ago about this potential project, followed by, let's wait and see how the pandemic goes. In August, Cynthia said she wanted me to read James Fenimore Cooper's book about his travels in Italy. I started reading it and realized it was more like a travel journal, but there is a poetry to his writing that I was attracted to. So when I got to the passage about his description of the Bay of Naples, stating it was the bluest blue he'd ever seen, I knew that was where I could begin to think about what these paintings would be. And then I was thinking about the idea of history and the layers created by days and months and years and all of the lives that have occurred during that time. And I wondered, how do I condense time and space into a single moment while showing these layers of time? And that gave me the idea to create a series of patterns on these paintings. And so I took the measurements of these paintings and divided it into 8 sections on a piece of paper. And then I took 5 pennies and tossed them. And I chose number 5 because of our 5 senses. And then I traced where these pennies landed. And I wanted chance to become a part of this painting. And by chance, I mean it's something that is taken outside of my control that I then have to respond to. So I created a template with paper, cutting out the areas where the pennies landed. And that template, the template then is flipped back and forth and upside down so that the painted marks begin to form a pattern. And once the marks are painted over the entire surface vertically, it's repeated horizontally. And then the template is reduced in size by 20%. And the same procedure is followed for a total of 14 layers for the large one and 10 layers for the small one. And it really, in my mind, becomes a visual echo. And there's almost a horizon line in the middle of the big painting, making the bottom half the water and the top half the hillside and sky. Another thought was depicting the morning, afternoon, and dusk with the patterns as they reflect off the sea. I was thinking almost like a time-lapse photo. And once all that was done, I added some thin glazes to create the sensation of falling light, appearing lighter at the top because of the sky, and then the reflections in the water. And I use a glaze medium that's very similar to the old masters. The physical light in a room penetrates the surface and reflects out, which makes it seem as if it's illuminated from within. So here I am in the city of Naples. This city is so inspiring. The light, the colors, combined with the history and architecture. Really doesn't get much better.
We continue our visit into the 10th room. This room, like the previous ones, is in neoclassical style dating back to the reign of Gioacchino Murat in Naples, and is characterized by a ceiling with a decoration in gray monochrome and a background known as pavonacetto. Because of its particular color scheme, in this space and environment, we decided to include the 4th artist in the exhibition, Ned Evans. He is a California artist and represents Californian art in an excellent way because his artistic experience is based on the 2 central movements of this country. On the one hand, there is the inspiration of light and space, a movement in which the colors and the light which is closely related to the color, define and determine the spatial guidelines that serve to build the scene in front of us. On the other hand, hard edge, a type of art and conception of painting in which the contours are sharply divided and which is a minimalistic derivation. From these two basic inspirations for this exhibition, the artistic vision of Ned Evans has emerged in a creation of two figurative works. The Blue Grotto, in which we see on the one hand the blue cave in its splendor and its power that only certain natural elements can give to us, and on the other hand, through the inclusion of an ironic element in his painting, we have the nuns crossing the cave. That is a sort of playful mystery wanted by the artist. We do not know if these nuns will return or not, so we do not know the fate of these little nuns. The other work in the exhibition, Sunset Alone in Pompeii, is characterized by a completely different atmosphere and emotion, is much more intimate and sometimes even metaphysical. In fact, there is the silhouette of Mount Vesuvius, and in the foreground, reference to Pompeii and some archaeological elements. So, in this context, where there is no other human presence, the viewers are the only human beings who are in front of this environment. Ned Evans, therefore, wanted to create a very intimate homage to our land. We are now in the 15th room. This is the room of Papyri, one of the most iconic and famous of all the royal palace of Portici. It is called in this way because in it there are valuable and quite unusual objects. The machine for opening the papyri, which is one of the rarest objects in the royal palace and also testifies to the excavations and discoveries of the past centuries in this area. Obviously, also the presence of this object is closely linked to the history of the royal palace of Portici and the villa of Papyri, representing one of the most important and iconic testimonies of the time of Charles of Bourbon. It was therefore decided to show in this setting the works of Miguel Osuna, which represent an episode equally iconic and rooted in the collective imagination of Campania, namely the eruption of Vesuvius. Specifically, Miguel Osuna refers to the eruption of Vesuvius from the perspective of Plinio the Elder. Plinio the Elder, in fact, indirectly witnessed the eruption of Vesuvius, and equally indirectly lost his life, not because of the eruption itself, but because of the fumes that were produced. Starting from this particular episode, the California artist of Mexican origin, Miguel Osuna, has decided to represent two moments of his historical episode through the fundamental stylistic feature of his art, which is the gesture. Miguel Osuna, in fact, has a particular gestural expressiveness that is extremely fluid, calligraphic, and meticulous, playing extremely in the repetition. In this case, in the two works shown here, which were created on a black velvet background that somehow absorbs the paint, among other things, he used a spatula with which he used to spread the paint to make these brushstrokes and microgestures, which in the case of the first work are extremely chaotic. Although the brushstroke is meticulous and repetitive, it has its own internal chaos, which delineates this imperfect perimeter, which is punctuated by the background of black velvet of which we spoke earlier. This is an excellent example of Miguel's artistic vision of the destructive moment of the eruption of Vesuvius, also characterized by the use of Baroque gold, another reference Miguel uses in homage to Neapolitan art. The second work is in contrast with the first one. It is as well black velvet, but in this case, he represents a gestural expressiveness that is no longer chaotic or explosive, but extremely measured, and above all, the perimeter that was previously imperfect, broken, and destroyed is now a perimeter that is finally complete, a symbol of hope for the continuation of life after the eruption. But now, let us hear the words of the artist himself about the idea behind the creation of this work.
Miguel Osuna, parliamo di queste opere che ha portato qui alla collettiva di Art 1307 in mostra a Portici.
Queste opere sono ispirate dal continuum di vita nella regione, in Napoli. E la idea, per esempio qui, è il circolo che è tagliato e l'ho posto in una posizione diversa, ma è un stop, un sisma alla vita quando un'eruzione occorre. E quello che passa è che possiamo vedere il circolo complesso, lo sappiamo che è una continuità, e questa è la continuità che io guardo in Napoli, una continuità di vita di 2000 anni.
Il Vesuvio sullo sfondo, la potenza dell'eruzione del Vesuvio, ma anche la fragilità dei cittadini e di un territorio.
E queste cose si può cambiare perché il vulcano è una fontana poderosa di forza naturale, ma la continuità della vita umana e l'intelletto è tra generazione portano la cultura e continua, che è una cosa di forza.
We are now in the room dedicated to Todd Williamson. Todd Williamson's poetic roots are in American abstract expressionism, particularly the color field painting of Rothko, that is, the use of large fields of color on canvas, and in the emotional and resonant tones of Kandinsky. These are his main cultural and artistic references that he uses to express what for him is a meditative act, realized through the brushstrokes that are disciplined and schematic, but also imbued with a strong charge of pathos, and that he uses to represent the impressions he had of Naples and the entire Campania region. His literary reference in this case was actually Truman Capote, who spoke not only about Naples, but also about Ischia and the lives of the islanders. The colors that Todd Williamson has chosen to represent his feeling and the impression he had of our area are mainly three. On the one hand, we have a blue with various and different shades, which are obviously the perfect and ideal reference to represent the fluidity of the sea that surrounds Naples, Capri, and Ischia. On the other hand, we have two different shades of red that he has chosen. A red color, more intense and vibrant, that represents the lava of Vesuvius and underlines the transience of life for those who lived around or near Vesuvius. On the other hand, we have a denser, more full-bodied red that, to use the artist's words, stands for blood. A blood, however, that is not to be understood with a massacre connotation, but a blood that ideally and metaphorically stands for family ties, warmth, human relationships that are so immediate. In the American point of view of Todd Williamson, these three colors could perfectly represent the Neapolitan people. But now, let us hear the words of Todd Williamson to explain the works.
Hi, this is Todd Williamson. This exhibition is a culmination of my work and experimentation with abstract expressionism. I was given Truman Capote to work with and his research on the island of Ischia and how it affected his work, and specifically his writing of In Cold Blood, which was completely written on the island. He and I are both Southerners, so I understood some of his temperamentality a little bit more. I really loved his discussion on the ocean and how time possessed in the islands and in Naples at that time. I've been to Naples many times, and the people, the warmth, the heart that is here is very, very important to me, and I feel very much a part of this. So for this exhibition, my work is about the sky, the ocean, the lava, and the blood that flows through the people of this amazing area of Italy. There's so much heart and connection to the people, and when they make friends and they are become part of the family. And I've experienced this many, many times. So in my work, these three works have many, many layers of colors on them, and different shades and different tones of blues and reds, and each of these are built up in order to create the final product of the piece that you see. So when you look at the works, in different lights, the blue will appear slightly different. The red will have different layers underneath it, which creates a tonality that I think is very, very important, almost a musical tonality. And I wanted very much to show the depth of emotions that exist for me in this part of Italy. I'm very grateful to be a part of this exhibition. It's been a wonderful experience, and I've learned a lot about myself and also about the writers that were part of this and how they came here to be creative and be inspired by this wonderful city.
The room chosen for Justin Garcia is the Pompeian room, and is very particular because it represents an illusion inside these spaces, because on the walls of this room there is a hypothetical scenography of what Pompeian houses must have been. The installation on the floor of this room is very interesting because it is made of different materials. The fundamental material is sand. The sand chosen for this installation is Vesuvian sand, so it has a reference to the spatial location of Garcia's work, especially considering the contrast between what is ancient and what is contemporary. These works are somehow suspended on the plexiglass plates which are left lying inside the sand. The peculiarity of the works themselves is the fact that they seem to be the same pieces of the wall that have been detached from this room and have fallen and spilled into the sands of Vesuvius.
My name is Justin Garcia. I am one of the artists in this exhibition. I've been paired with Mark Twain to discuss with you about my work. My work over here is about aging walls. It's about the human perception of time and how we perceive it. Like air, it's not something you see directly. It's in the objects it affects in space. And so when I want to think about creating something of that nature, I worked in the concepts of old aging walls and adding layers and layers of paint and touch-up of culture and Mother Nature and the moments that people write on these walls, and then deconstruct it through time to represent how we perceive time. And as my works in general are about that, and traveling around the world and seeing how old walls decay and fold and how culture affects them, I wanted to bring that into Naples and express how these walls around us here in Naples and how they fall and how they've left time for us to reflect upon.